Hello and welcome to this week's episode of A Bazaar podcast. As per usual, you can find us both on YouTube as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcast or via RSS feed for your favorite podcast listening app of choice. Today, you will be joined by me, MetallFenix, as well as the first of my co-hosts, Walter.
This is Peace Rottler.
And today we have the lovely guest MartinPill joining us. Why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm Martin from Germany. I'm playing the Bazaar since the very first day of closed beta, and the Bazaar is possibly the best game I ever played.
There you go. It seems like a very popular game with the Germans. I think that's probably our most represented demographic among the guests. How did you end up finding out about the game?
Sorry, I didn't
How
understand the
did you
question.
end up finding out about the game? What brought you to the Bazaar? Is it something you'd
Yeah,
been following for? Yeah.
I'm an ex Hearthstone player, so
Mm-hmm.
I knew Reynard from back then, and at some point I knew he had plans of doing his own game, and I just followed his path and was waiting for the game since then. Yeah, and
And
then
have you been a dually main the whole time, or did you? I mean, most people start with Vanessa, right?
I think for the first week I played Vanessa, then I switched to Pick for like 2 months, and after that I'm a dually main.
Okay, all right. So you did give the other ones a fair shake.
Yeah, I played every hero
Okay.
for some time. True.
There you go. Well, that
That's
is
good.
kind of a perfect segue into what have you been playing this week. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you have been doing on Dooley?
All right, yeah. So I'm a dually grinder. I have a very fast-paced stream, so I'm just grinding dually the whole time, and mostly it's ignition core with the drill still after the nerf. I think it's still viable and playable, and I enjoy it very much.
Okay. Do you feel like, all right, even though drill was nerfed, some of like the surrounding pieces have improved like in a way that's not favorable to drill necessarily, but just the other cards are just better that surround drill, like stuff like Induction Aegis or like Brick Buddy at higher, or not Brick Buddy, Bomb Squad at higher rarities. Stuff like that is like kind of some of like these minor drill pieces. Do you think that that's actually, put made drill a little bit better positioned even despite the nerf?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the Firefly bomb squad combination is great, but I think the build is kinda the same as last patch still.
Okay. And how about like Railgun? I know Vampire Dooley, who was on last week, was saying that he was having success with Railgun. Have you tried Railgun at all, or no?
I have tried Railgun, and I believe it's a very strong build, but it's not very consistent for me, sadly. I
Gotcha.
tried it a few times, and I would say like 1 out of 3 times it works well if you find the Railgun early, but otherwise,
And a little enchant dependent, I would say.
yeah, of course, also,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's one of the kind of the downsides of it. Almost that's kind of something that a lot of builds that are really like putting all their eggs in one basket, like are you're centered around one large item, and then you become extremely dependent on the quality of the enchant on that item. Um, it's kind of something you see across heroes. Um, not sure about. I mean, I think maybe the game is suffering a little bit under the weight of the power of the enchants, or maybe the difference between the power of the best enchant and the worst enchant when you artist is weighing heavily on your runs. Not you specifically, but just everyone, right? And I think that maybe that's something that I'd hope to see toned down in the future. I'm not sure how they would do it, but man, it seems like at least with what the meta is right now, like the like getting obsidian on something that it's good on is so crazy. Getting, you know what I mean, like getting one of the 10x enchants is just so crazy, and it's hard to want to do anything else, you know.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, but I can imagine how difficult it is to balance the game. They are changing stuff frequently, also with the enchants.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
it's
I
very
mean,
hard to find a good spot, and
yeah, I wonder if just the 10, just the 10 number is too high. Like, what if it was just like 8x, right? Like, if basically, like, if Obsidian was 8x the burn of something instead of 10x the burn,
yeah, yeah.
that might make it a little bit more reasonable. I'm not sure. I just feel like it's something that's it's it's pervasive when I watch Bazaar gameplay. Is this is insane with Obsidian? This one's insane with Heavy. You know what I mean? It's like where everyone's very tunneled on how these high roll enchants, are going to propel you to 10 wins and like this is going to be the solution. And I
I
don't know if that's like the most healthy state
I totally
compared to
agree.
changing
Yeah.
your items. Sorry, did you want to go ahead, Metal?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that what I've personally been feeling a lot is that more so than how impactful a hitting your enchant can be, I think the biggest issue for me with the current system has been how detrimental it feels if you ever miss an enchant, where it's like now you're going to be fighting a very uphill battle for pretty much the rest of the game because it's the most significant power spike you get throughout all of it. And it
Yeah.
started to cause me to really lean into builds and play styles where you can have to press artist as little as possible. For example, I think a great example of this is when you're playing Vanessa and you have an item like Vanessa's amulet or maybe an early holster. A lot of the time, it serves to give you an outlet for where, if you get one of the utility enchants like haste or slow, they tend to go really great on the holsters, on the shot glasses, on the amulet. If you get something like burn, a lot of the time you can put it on an amulet or dive weights to set up for a keg pivot angle. And then if you get one of these really good scaling enchants as your face-up enchant, sometimes it can of course be fiery. But honestly, a lot of the time, the face-up enchant I'm the most happy to see on Vanessa can tend to be shielded for like pufferfish or anglerfish or something. I feel like you become so much more consistent when you have that option of almost no matter what your face up enchant is, you have a good target on your board for it, and so you don't end up with that RNG scenario. And I've actually been feeling like the new items on Mac really help with that too. Since if you're playing a build with weapons that scale, you have a skill like Toxic or something. If you find a Toxic enchant, it's really good to just put it on one of your weapons. Or if you find one of the good defensive enchants and you have like a Adrenal Converter or a rapid injection system, both of the ones that do things whenever you poison yourself, they tend to be really strong with like the slow enchants or the defensive enchants sometimes too. And of course, it's really nice that they removed Radiant from so many items, since it means that if you're playing Poppy Field, you never need to worry about pressing the artist because there are no outright bad hits. There are just better or worse hits, but there's no risk of your carry item suddenly having really low impact. So that's at
Yeah,
least
I definitely
been,
like the
yeah.
radiant removal. The removal of radiant from all the passive items is really nice. I mean, I think that's a
Mm,
step in the right direction of I mean, what we're kind of like dancing around the same thing, right? We're both
yeah.
saying in so many words that like the difference between the high roll and the low roll is too great, right? Like
Yeah.
one way of saying is that the low roll is too low, and another way of saying is that the high roll is too high. But the point is that the delta is too much. So
Yeah. And it always feels like it ends up disproportionately kind of, at least, and this might just be from a perspective of a player who tries to have a really high consistent win rate rather than going for fun or niche or specific high rolls. But if you want to win as much as possible, if that's your primary objective, it feels like this current implementation of the system can sometimes narrow the range of the builds that you feel like you can realistically pursue.
yeah, like you have to play Poppy because it has good artist hits, or you have to
Right.
play Rapid Injector because because it's like quote unquote safe to put on artist.
Because
I
that
definitely
was
get
like,
that. I definitely
yeah.
get that feeling for sure.
It was one of the big things with femur, right? Where even before the nerfs, I was somewhat low on femur. But the most noticeable thing was that if you had obsidian or no obsidian on femur, it obviously makes it feel like a completely different item.
Yeah, it's the
Since,
same with Railgun. It's
yeah,
actually takes us directly back to where we started, which is
yeah.
like when you have this single big carry item, you're just dependent. You're just dependent on your
Yeah,
enchant, and
I've
it's
seen it a lot with like Tortuga as well, where if
yep.
you have Obsidian Tortuga, it's so easy to have that be a primary carry item. Whereas if you don't, you have to rely on finding upgrades on it from the shop usually, because the gap between level 7 and level 13 to try to get your Tortuga from gold to diamond is such a large span where you're not seeing any dramatic power spikes that you can really start to struggle with just the natural health of opponents if you're actually trying to have it be like your primary carry rather than like an auxiliary engine. And I think that can be the problem sometimes, right? It's as you were saying initially, it feels a little bit bad when getting one enchant or not that specific enchant can like completely warp how a comp performs.
Yeah. I mean, Obsidian is the worst offender, right?
Obsidian is the
It's
worst offender.
because
Yeah.
it's both like the carry item doubler, and then it's also like the 10x like cheeser. You know what I mean? It's also like the Obsidian Catfish day one killing you.
It's
Do you
just
know what
one
I
of
mean?
those where like damage is always good, right?
Yeah. I just think it could. I just think it's like compare it to like it's just weird to have like
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just so much worse than Deadly, or sorry, Deadly is just so much worse than it. It's like laughable actually if you think about it, because
Yeah.
not only is it like twice as good as Deadly like in the abstract, Deadly also like can miss when you have crit solved in other ways, and Obsidian can't miss ever.
But Deadly
So
is weird because it's kind of this like utility enchant almost at
yeah,
this
it's better.
point.
It's a lot of times it's better on stuff that's like passive, that's like
Yeah,
hitting
if you get
multiple.
Deadly on
Yeah.
Vanessa's Amulet, it feels so good because it means that now you can play a really wide variety of comps and you have a really smooth keg pivot later on as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of it is just like, look, some of the enchants are just counterintuitive, like, and
Yeah.
that's hard, and that's just hard to that's just hard to like solve completely, I think,
It
because
could maybe be interesting. I don't know, this is just a random idea that popped into my head, but the idea of having deadly enchant on weapons be like 25% crit and then 25% crit damage or something.
yeah, is that like better in the like, is that how to say, is that actually stronger than 50% crit straight up? Isn't that much weaker than
So
50%
the
crit straight up?
idea for me would be then that it helps you partially solve crit, and it also drastically increases your ceiling when you are solving crit.
Yeah, but doesn't it mean that if you're just like a guy who doesn't care about crit and then you artist and you get deadly, it's just completely horrible?
I
Like
think it
it,
would math out to be somewhat similar. Because you would only crit 1 in 4 times, but that one crit is worth 2 crits, so it would be equivalent to critting 1 in 2 times on
yeah,
average if
no,
you
no, but
activate the
is
item
it
four
double crit
times.
damage or is it 25% more crit damage? Because if it's 25% crit
Oh
chance and
yeah, you're right. You're
25%
right.
more crit
Yeah,
damage,
that's
now
true.
it's way
That's
less
true.
damage.
Yeah. No, it's a tricky one. But Martin, what have you been feeling with the current state of Dooley? Is it similar on him? Is the enchant you get really important for how your run goes?
It's really important. Yeah, what I can say, I feel like Dooley is by far the weakest character right
Mm,
now.
I don't
And
necessarily disagree with that. Yeah.
as you
yeah.
mentioned, yeah, right now it's really crucial to get heal, armor, or damage enchant
Yeah.
on the core. Those are by far the strongest. So I totally agree.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, if
just
you get those, then you have a
And
10-win
that's from the
contender, and
perspective
otherwise
of
it's
ignition
rough.
core, right? Like that's from the perspective of the
I
10x ignition core enchants.
True, true, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's relatively true for both Julie and Vanessa in general though, is something that I notice very clearly when I'm playing Pig or Mac versus playing Vanessa or Dooley is the fact that Dooley and Vanessa have really poor realistic options for meaningful defense in the mid to late game stage of a match, which means that if you're trying to play a scaling comp, it's really likely that you might just get raced. The big reason why Trebuchet, for example, at least in my experience, can really struggle when you're going up against something like Poppy or drums is largely because the Poppy field player can very easily choose to include something like just a runic potion on their board, and the drum player, the pig, have a lot of ways to make sure that their base health is just bigger than the Vanessa's, which means that if you're just doing this back and forth, then the player who has, even if they have maybe less damage, they're just going to out sustain you because you need to deal twice the damage that they need to deal. And I've always noticed, like, it feels really sweet whenever you're playing something like Saloon or just anything with pufferfish or anglerfish, and you get that defensive enchant. It's like playing a whole different game because now you can suddenly be sure that having like conflagration or having Yeti crab or whatever you have, it's gonna actually matter because you'll have at least some time in a match for you to scale. But when all you're relying on is raw base health and you don't have any way of making your base health really high, it just kind of feels like, oh, I got raced. What can I do about it? And I think Dooley, at least from my perspective, suffers from that a lot too, where you only have two options. Either you have to rush people hyper aggressively, or you have to hope that you can get defenses from an enchant, because there are no Dooley items that make you tanky. Would you say that's accurate, Martin?
Yeah, it's absolutely true, yeah. I often tend to focus on the chocolate bars early on,
Mm-hmm.
so I have more HP. Absolutely true, yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in and say like about the I'm sorry about the kind of like tankiness and racing with Vanessa with Treb and like I also feel like Treb builds and Vanessa burn builds in general have fallen off a lot in this patch and have kind
Yeah.
of been. I mean, part of it I think is due to the cleansing change, right? I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that really hurt Vanessa and Treb specifically. Um, and I think that what's replaced it is a build that can compete with like Poppyfield and Drum in scaling, which is like the custom scope Julian eels thing,
Yeah.
where you scale insanely fast with the lifesteal eels. And I think that like we've kind of entered, I mean, obviously like that build is unbelievably vulnerable to crowd control, right?
Yeah.
And so you see we've kind of like the meta is shifting and there's now like this new point of vulnerability, right? So in order to answer drum and poppy and whatever like a adrenal Mac builds there are, whatever you want to call the Mac builds, Vanessa has moved to this hyper scaling two active item build, which now opens up the opportunity for CC again. So I think that yes, like some stuff has fallen out of favor, Treb has fallen out of favor, like those those things all happen and are real, but you can actually see the I have felt the meta change through this week, right? Peace Raw became more popular. I'm sure Martin, you've experienced it yourself. Um, Peace Raw became more popular from the beginning of last week to the end of this week, noticeably, right? Like significantly noticeably. Um, and the
Yeah,
only
I
thing that
think, you
became
know
more
what,
popular
that
is
this seems
the
like
eels
a
build.
good thing to put a footnote in. And we can jump to the topic of the week, and
Yeah,
then
I'm
we
sorry.
can get back to that in because I'm realizing I have a lot of things that I want to say about what you're talking about too, and it flashed
Okay,
in
I'm
front of
sorry.
me
I'm
like
sorry. Yeah, 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 yeah.
the
I'm sorry.
40
I
minute
jumped to
delay
the I
on the
jumped
yeah.
ahead to the meta discussion because I thought it was relevant. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll
We'll put
treat
a
it
pin
as a
in
little
it.
bit of a sneak peek, and we can start off by moving on to the topic of the week, where we figured, hey, we got another Dually main on the podcast. It's a perfect opportunity to, now that the dust has settled, not a lot has changed patch wise, and you've had a lot of time to try out all of the various new cores and all of that stuff. So we're gonna do a bit of a Dually core deep dive. And yeah, why don't you just start us off, Martin, with what's been your general thoughts and feelings on what they did?
Yeah, it's strange for dually players, of course, because in first place it's very hard to get level 3 on day 2
Mm.
because of the barrier change. So often you don't get the core on day 2. Yeah, and
Yeah.
So I mean,
otherwise,
do you think that it's hard to separate, right? Like, but wasn't there was the patch where you could get the core on day two much easier, right? Before the Warrior change,
Yes,
but
it felt
after the core change, right?
very different when they replaced Rogue Scrapper with Warrior.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, like, do you think that do you think that like, imagine if Warrior was beatable more often, right? Would you think that that would leave Dooley in a good position, or there's still more to be fixed?
in a better position at least, for
Mm.
Okay,
sure.
okay. So do you think that the issue is that like, because I think that actually they will tone down Warrior. I think that it's Warrior is really punishing for casual
Yeah.
players. The existence of Warrior is it's tough on your
Especially
average
this
like
whole like
non-competitive player. Yeah.
you can calculate deterministically if you will beat the warrior, but it's either a lot of work or you need to have really good intuition from a lot of experience. And I figure that the average player might end up going down one of two routes where either you just never fight warrior because it doesn't seem worth it, or you wing it a lot and sometimes you get extremely punished by losing that crucial day 2 PV encounter. And it's probably, yeah, I can't imagine that it feels great.
Yeah, I think it will be made easier. I mean, I do like the existence of rewards for being strong in the
Hmm.
early game. I think you should be rewarded for being strong in the early game. I think that's a good mechanical philosophy. That's a good idea to be in the game. But
I would
um
just almost
yeah, I
like
think
it
it's gonna get
more
better.
if, if it gave some kind of cool reward, like a neat skill or item, rather than just outright saying rich get richer, you manage to be ahead by the PvE. So now you're going to be even further ahead by the PvP.
Yeah, the amount of I mean, like the other thing is like I had a game yesterday where I beat Borior and still didn't level because I just
Yeah.
literally never saw a TFM for a
Hmm.
full day one or two. Like so there's like the other aspect of it too where it's like yeah, there's the variance of like whether or not you found items that beat Borior, but then there's also like this whole other layer of variance of the TFM thing that can also prevent you from leveling. So I think it's like in a way it's like it's like maybe Borior feels bad for casual players. To me, I personally like Borior. I like calculating my fights. I
Hmm.
like doing the math and
Yeah.
playing to my limits or whatever. So I like it, but for me, what I don't like is never seeing TFM and just
Yeah.
getting screwed out of level 3 for nothing even though I feel like I played the early game to like I don't want to say I played it perfectly, but I played in a way such that if I ever saw TFM at any point in day 1 or 2, I would have been level 3 on day 2. So there's the level of frustration from me, and then there's level of frustration from the rest of the player base with
Mm.
Borior. Not saying like I'm the only person who beats Borior, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Um, but so I think that yeah, maybe it needs to be looked at generally, or like the whole what do you want to call it? The whole economy, the whole level economy of days
Yeah.
1 and 2 needs to be looked at. Is a better way of putting it.
I think I agree. It just feels like one of those things where it would probably be more smooth if you just naturally leveled up on day one, day two, instead of needing to jump through all those hoops. Before we had making sure you leveled up on one was disproportionately impactful. Now it's for ages been
Yeah,
doing it on
I mean, if you
two is yeah.
there has to be some point in the game where players get lapped in levels.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everyone is the same level as the day for the entire game,
Hmm.
right? So there must be some
True, true.
day that happens where players first get lapped. That has to be something that happens
Yeah.
in the game.
But it just feels
So,
like it's way more fine when it's like 7, 10, 13, and 16 already have pretty big payoffs to hitting them early. But it feels like once you get past the point where it's going to straight up affect how much space you have available, that's when it starts to taper out in terms of at least frustration from my
yeah, I
perspective.
actually think another way to address this may sound weird. I think another way to address it would be to either give players more HP starting
Mm,
or and that sounds weird, but the reason is that I think the reason the 2 versus 3 thing feels so horrible is because it happens at a point in time when your ratio of HP pool to board space is extremely low.
yeah.
So like you have so little HP relative to the amount of space on your board. Compare it to I don't know, day 6 or something where you have 1100 HP and 10 spaces,
Yeah.
right? So there's more board space than there is HP, and that's what makes like the 3 versus 2 feel so crazy.
Yeah.
It feels completely unwinnable because of the way the numbers are. So I think yeah, that's part of something
Yeah.
that should be looked at. I think that the way it plays into the core mechanic is really unfortunate
Yeah.
for Dooley. It's
But
almost like it would have been better off if he got his core later, like do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
at the following level, and then
Or if you just more reliably did get the level up on day
yeah, and then they
two.
just make his items better in the early games
Yeah.
to compensate for that. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
But to
It's
yeah,
such a
to
fine
kind
balance.
of bring us back to the actual topic of Dooley's course, I've also been meaning to ask someone who plays a lot of Dooley, from your perspective, Martin, how have you felt about the fact that you're offered 5 out of 6 cores and that, from what we can see, it's also weighted in terms of making it so that you can almost deterministically get ignition core every game? Do you feel like having that agency is a good thing, or do you feel like it was almost more fun when you had some restrictions and had to figure out how to make various cores work? What's your personal opinion on that?
Yeah, the problem with most cores is that you really need, first of all, you need to start with the gold skill or with the enchanted item so you can later on play around a specific build. And if you want to be really more flexible, then I like that you get to choose from 5 cores
Yeah.
and not, let's say, 3, because then I'm just more really flexible and can decide what I want to play, and I'm not focused on one thing. Like we talked about the railgun build. If
Yeah.
I don't get the ignition core and I choose the core or the crit core, for example, then I'm really looking to find a railgun, and if I don't, it doesn't look too well.
Yeah,
So yeah.
gotcha. Give me just one brief. Okay, sorry for that brief pause. Listeners shouldn't notice anything, but in case it just looks like we suddenly paused in the middle of something, I just had to. Yeah. Anyways, back to what I was kind of curious about. I've right now, you're not the only person I've heard saying basically only play Ignition Core. In your eyes, what do you think would need to change for you to feel more willing to pick other cores and not just end up in this Ignition Core centric playstyle? What's like the big problem with the rest of them?
Yeah, the problem with Dually in general is that like half of the items are completely useless. And so I'm not tempted to try out different builds, because for me the ignition drill burn setup is just the most consistent.
So
But
it's
again,
more.
what I can say, if you start with the gold skill or with the enchanted item start, then you have specific skills or items that you can build around. So it's easier to try out different cores. But I'm a gold income player, so yeah, I'm just used to play
That's
my
interesting
my
to me.
strategy that works the best for me.
I I feel like Dooley would be the one. It's interesting to me that you favor gold income. I know some other Dooley players like skill. I'm curious why you favor gold income in this meta or in this version of Dooley, whatever the
Yeah, the
reasoning.
funny thing is, I will admit that I think the skill start is the best, but for me especially, I just love the freedom early on, entering shops, re-rolling. So for me
Gotcha.
personally, I prefer this playstyle the
Just the
most.
ability to find the exact item that
True,
you
true.
want and you think are good. Okay. Yeah, I mean it makes sense, right? Like if income start definitely allows, if you feel like certain items are required to win or certain setups are essential to your success, then it makes sense why you want golden income, right? Because it gives you the best possible chance of finding exactly those items or setups.
True,
Um,
true.
if
Yeah,
you
and the
start,
problem in general also is both the skill start and the enchanted item start. It's gambling. It's
Yeah.
RNG, and I didn't play
yeah,
it so much. I would need to play it for like 100 games to really make a conclusion. But I tried both starts a couple of times, and in some games you don't get any value at all. Like it's a downside even. You get a bad enchanted item or a bad skill, and then not only that you don't have the gold early on, but you have a really weak start. So yeah, I it's not consistent for me, but I would need
yeah,
to play much more games to make a real conclusion.
I agree. It doesn't have the same level of consistently executing the same game plan. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say that's the same thing as like you said, like you think maybe skill start is could be like like stronger overall if you play, if you know, in the aggregate you played tons of games and whatever, like. And I'm also kind of in that camp of thinking like, yeah, skill start has low rolls, yeah, enchanted item store has low rolls, but those are compensated for in terms of win rate by the high roll ability of them. So like, over many games, it shouldn't express itself so much. Like it should be more. It should be over the appropriate number of games, consistent in a way. Um, that said, does the existence of Boreor, etc., tempt you into wanting to try skill? Like I mean, skill is one of the ways that you can kind of get level 3 on day 2 easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in the future I will try it again for sure.
Okay.
And if you get a nice high roll skill, then it helps a lot. You will beat the Borea possibly.
And is your
I
normal
totally
strategy just
agree.
like blast doors or whatever? Like you fight him when you have blast doors? Is that your kind of go to?
Yeah, sometimes when I get the Blastos early and I can upgrade it to silver, then you can beat the Borea kinda easily.
Okay,
But doesn't happen too often, sadly.
fair enough.
Yeah, I think just trying to like sum up what you've been mentioning about the issues with the course and kind of add in my perspective, as I'm a bit of an outsider. I still have, I think, the second most amount of games in total on Dooley. I've played the character a fair bit, but not much after the core changes. And it's seemed a lot like, to me, the issue is not necessarily that drill is too good, but drill seems to almost be the only direction on Dooley that can be signaled early other than force field if you happen to have a gold defense grid starting skill, where it feels like Dooley doesn't have any insane late game comps, so it's not like you're incentivized to pick a core that you know builds into a specific late game comp, because your late game comps are on average weaker than the other heroes right now, so you'd rather win early. And there aren't any other items at like bronze silver that can really signal a different direction to the point where you know that you'll be able to reliably hit that board. And it's always felt like that's the reason why so many people end up with this drill centric ignition core playstyle, because it's almost the only thing that you can have your early game clearly signal to you that this is direction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dooley needs other late game options. For now, if you are lucky and find a Dualtron, then you have a very strong late game option or build. But otherwise, Dooley is struggling a lot after day 10, 11, 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I'm glad you
also,
mentioned
yeah,
Dualtron because that's kind of the other. That's maybe like Dooley's second best or second most common line is going to be
yeah.
like bugs into Dualtron or like bugs into Ballista into Dualtron. Like maybe like you're stopping at Ballista on the way to win you some mid game, something like that. So I mean, there are other lines do exist. It's just yeah, man, he's kind of weak compared to Mac in the late game, and compared to Pig, and even compared to Vanessa in a way. Although Vanessa is a little weird. Vanessa is very strange. Her builds are all over the place in the late game. Some of them are insane, some of them are absolutely horrible. So
I think
it's a
it's
little
also, in my eyes, it's one of those things where I think Ballista is a great example, but also to a degree, for example, Thermal Lance or Flamethrower, they're all items, even like the hydraulic hammer or whatever it's called, the one that charges when you
nitrogen
freeze.
hammer. Yeah,
Nitrogen
nitrogen
hammer,
hammer.
yes. Um, they're all items that can totally carry runs if you find them and if you have the right core. If you have Nitrogen Hammer with the core and you're charging freeze items, becomes really powerful. If you have, it's also true with like cybersecurity with crit core or the core. if you have Bellista with the companion core, even the thermal lance can work really well with companion core, flamethrower with weaponized core. But all of these items start either at silver or at gold, which creates this disparity where when you have to pick your core, the only thing you can know for certain is probably I have a drill, which goes great with the ignition core, or I could pick one of these different cores and hope that I find the item that pairs with it, but if I don't, my run's a little bit screwed. And it feels like maybe this could be alleviated a little bit if some of these essential items for other angles of playing different cores were brought down in rarity a bit to where you'd maybe be able to say, oh, I picked up a bronze ballista, so I know that I can pick companion core and it will be meaningful because I'll spend my level 4 like upgrade to silver enchant to bring that up and then play it with my companion core, like something like that. If you just had other directions that you could find as earliest drill, maybe it wouldn't feel so bad to potentially commit to them.
But like, what does a weaponized core late game board even look like outside of flamethrower? It's
Yeah.
like what items could they even bring down that I would want to play in the late? Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm not even sure what
Weaponized core
items.
is a tough one, yeah.
Yeah, so I think some of the problems run even deeper than that. Some of the problems are like I can get a GPU for that hastes my core that I don't have yet. Like there's a lot of I think cleaning up still that needs to be done
Yeah.
with the early game core thing. Like the fact that GPU exists at bronze doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? But at the same time, you can't just take away all of Dooley's bronze items.
Yeah.
If you take away Alpha Ray and GPU and anything and memory card, it's like he just has no items left at bronze. So I'm not sure. I think what I'd like to see them do is just give him good bronze starting items
That
like
would
that
also
don't
be
mention
very
the
nice,
core. Do
yeah.
you know what I mean? That are just
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
functional on their own, and then maybe you can feel like A, you can more often beat Borior because your items are better, and B, that because your items are better, you're more willing to invest in them and then pick a core that goes with them. So
Yeah.
I think maybe like he just needs one or two new items straight up that start at bronze that are strong,
Yeah.
and that are good at fighting early.
True, yeah, true.
And then I think that might alleviate a lot of the problems.
Yeah, what do you
Do you
think,
want to go on
Martin?
to?
Do you
Okay, go
feel
ahead.
like if you had more items that would signal directions towards other cores, it would feel a bit easier to justify picking them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what you guys just said is a great idea. Yeah, we
Okay.
need better bronze early items, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's one of the nice things about I'll move us on to the state of the meta. But on that topic, I do think it is one of the things that I appreciate a lot about Mac historically and right now. Before the new items, a lot of the time it would be you picking up things like the incense and smelling salts to signal that you knew that you had an easy time transitioning into the femur. For a decent amount of the time, it was having a philosopher's stone stacked up was a good way to transition into the staff of the moose boards. Now, at this point, I feel like it's a little bit more if you already know you have catalysts and peace rod, it gives you a lot of direction. But also just finding all of those bronzes that go into the poppy field boards, that's a lot of direction. Or even just finding the crit support package with the carpet, that's something that you can run for a lot of days. And I know that there are a lot of people too who even like to make crit carpet work all the way to their final board, especially with that. It's the runic glaive, right? The sword that gains
Yeah, I
damage.
mean, if you can like win the whole game with that build, it's like a 10-0 build. It is good if you can keep tempo the whole game. It
Yeah.
is strong. And it can like cap out, like you can get stuff like 2 carpets with pendulum in between that go infinite, and so like there
Hmm.
actually are ways to like make it quote unquote go late and be like really insane. They're kind of hard to do. Like it's hard to find. It's really hard to find damage scaling with that build, but um, it is possible to go late with that build. But it's kind of like a 10-0 or bust kind of
Yeah.
build, you know?
I think, at least in my eyes, the perfect kind of items and early game designs are things that give you enough direction that you can actually feel like it's meaningful, but at the same time, they don't force you to be so committed that you always end up staying in those builds and you like never pivot. Um, I think there's like
Yeah.
a
I
sweet
mean,
spot.
carpet is definitely that on that, right? Where
Yes,
it's like
yes.
I have
Carpet's
games
so fun.
where I play carpet for 2 days, and then I have games where I play carpet for 7 days, right? And it depends on my other cards, but that's like good actually, right? That tells you that it's like right on the line of an early game item, like just it has like this tension, right? Like it's a 50 damage based item, like clearly that's really good early, but then like ooh, how long can I keep this on my board? How long can I get value out of this card? Like that's interesting, and those
Yeah.
are interesting decisions to make in the game. Whereas I mean, compare that to like the like Mustaf or something where it's like, oh, I got this on. I mean, not. I mean, Mustaf's an amazing card, but like it's like, oh, I got Mustaf on day 3. Like it's probably staying on my board the whole game. So
But that's
I
the
mean,
nice thing, though. I
you
think
can
even,
transfer out of
yeah,
staff, I guess, but
Mustaf's pretty pivotable out of as well.
yeah,
Um,
that's fair.
I think from the perspective of Vanessa, a lot of the time it's like if you find early Vanessa's amulet, it opens up much more like keg angles later. But then it's especially when you find Zoracid or Yeti Crab, they give you a lot of direction in terms of which comps you can go for. And even, especially after it got buffed, just having like a decently upgraded pistol shrimp gives you a lot of flexibility for boards. And I think that's really fun. Sometimes he's turns into a build around carry piece with card table. Sometimes he ends up just being one of the cards in your saloon or shot glasses board that's just part of the value package. And sometimes you end up transitioning out of him completely because you found something else that you want to do, maybe like Tortuga that doesn't really slow. I like cards like that a lot, where it just feels like they can sometimes hit endgame boards, but they're not so disproportionately good that you feel like you have to force them. Um,
Yeah, they're flexible, but not every card. I mean, like not every card can be that, right? Like
yeah.
you need to have a variety. Like it's totally
Mm-hmm.
appropriate for some cards to just be bad in the early game or bad in the late game or
Yeah.
whatever. Like I think that's not so much of a problem. I think part of the skill expression of the game is identifying when your board has reached its expiration date
Mm-hmm.
and pivoting. You know what I mean? Like that's part of the skill test. So
I've been
so you do want the
really,
variety.
yeah, I've been really liking the design of the barbed claws, the Mac item that gets multicast based on how many players are poisoned. I think maybe it could use like just a little balancing nudge, like maybe 1 more second or something, but I like the fact that it feels like an item that you can't really play if you have no poison, or well, you probably shouldn't play it if you have no poison, but it's totally passable even if you're only poisoning your opponent, like maybe you just have a Venom or a Aludel or something, and then it turns into an item that's really good when you're also poisoning yourself. I think designs like that are very fun to me.
Well, one thing I like about it actually is like maybe you actually decide to play it or not play it on days 1 or 2 based on what champion
Oh,
your or what
yes,
hero
yes.
your opponent is. That's another thing I really like in cards is when I'm actually feel like ooh, maybe I could tweak my board or make my board a little bit better against this specific opponent based on some information about the meta. So what I like about claws is like I'm more inclined to play them early. Like given the situation that I don't have a way to poison myself, I'm more likely to play them if my opponent is a Mac or a Vanessa than I
Yeah.
am if they are a Dooley or a pig. So I think items and designs like that are good.
Hmm.
I agree. Claws is a really good design. It's like one of the key glue pieces of
Hmm.
the new Mac cards for
We
sure.
we did also have there was something I told you to put a pin in on the topic of the week. Do you mind reminding me what where were we at with that discussion?
Um, what was I talking about? Okay, yeah, it was something about Vanessa, the meta shifting from Vanessa
Yes, yes, single
going
weapon
from wide
Vanessa being so
weapons. Like,
prevalent now.
yeah, like basically what I think has happened is that wide weapon scaling, I mean, it's kind of been outclassed by drum slash poppy field
Yeah.
slash Mac regen stuff, and so the response from Vanessa's has been the Eels Julian or like
I will
Julie, you know what
say
I mean?
by
Custom
far
scoped meta.
the most common pairing I've been running into with Julian is the submersible.
Oh yeah,
Because
or
at
that what or
yeah.
card table shark right. Like there's a
No,
bunch
so
of ways
that's
you
the
can do it.
interesting thing. I very rarely see like card table variations or eel variations, but I
Oh, I
faced
play
like
against eels a
okay,
lot.
interesting. Because personally, it's just been every run I'm guaranteed to see multiple submersibles. That's like a given.
Yeah, I mean
It's been
it's a
interesting.
good way to do it, right? It's a
Mm.
good way to go about this strategy, right?
I
Because
also
it's
do
super fast
think,
cooldown.
especially now that Vanessa's other builds have had drastic increase in complexity, I feel like people who want a more formulaic kind of comfort build on Vanessa will likely always gravitate towards single weapon builds since they're the most straightforward by a lot, at least in my eyes.
But this version of single weapon is totally new, right? This
Yeah.
custom scope card is kind of nuts. Okay, like
Yeah, it's
if you
definitely made you have to reevaluate Orange Julian as a much more viable scaling option since his big issue, right, was obviously that his speed was terrible. And now, if you have a way to reliably charge him, then he still
yeah.
has similar vulnerabilities, but at least you can guarantee that if you don't get bursted and you don't get crowd control, then he will scale ridiculously.
Yeah, I just maybe just have PTSD from some Eels games where my opponent just had enormous Eels with
Mm,
Julian custom scope, and I got raced with Poppy Field where I thought my board was like not raceable. I think that maybe I mean obviously that's like a bit of a counter, right? Like one weapon has always been the counter. One weapon lifesteal has always been the counter to wide weapon strategies, whether
yeah.
they're coming from Mac or Pig or Vanessa. Like
I will say
that's
my
kind of the truth of it.
experience has been that my poppy boards seem to generally beat the single weapon Vanessa boards
Yeah,
currently.
usually, and
Yeah.
that's why I have to call it out when I when I get eel Julian and the
Yeah,
eel
yeah,
is
yeah.
hitting for 1,600 or whatever, and it's yeah.
I'm
Um,
curious, from the dually perspective, Martin, how has the single weapon Vanessa matchup been for you, and have you been seeing a lot of it?
I have to say I haven't played against it that much,
Okay.
but I would say most of the times it's a rather easy matchup for me, especially if you have some freeze ready.
Yeah.
Right, is that something
That's what
you...
I would think is that Dooley actually would counter these
Mm.
builds. Is that if you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
Blue
kinda, I would
Beetle, then
say
you're
that.
a bit of a counter.
Are you picking up a lot of freeze items currently?
Yeah, yeah, skills, freeze skills. I'm trying
Mm,
to
yeah.
play the coolant in every game. Every time I see the coolant, it's an
Yeah.
insta buy, and I
The one
also
time
like a lot
for
to focus on freeze skills.
Yeah.
yeah, the one time 4 second freezes are crazy against the one weapon Vanessa. That's like
Yeah.
True,
the
true.
if you can stack multiple of them, they're so amazing against her. But and like that's good. Like this to me, like if you're changing Martin, if you're changing your play, based on this, or even just like thinking about it, like having it influence your decisions. That to me is good. That means that that's the process of the meta balancing itself.
Yeah,
So I think that should be viewed as a success.
I've always found that single weapon Vanessa is one of those builds where, in terms of being relatively formulaic and forcible, it's not one that I mind too much. Because the reason why they oftentimes end up the same is just because so much of your board space is occupied by the crow's nest and the silencer, and now the custom scope, like the
Yeah, there's limited room
semi-mandatory
for
support pieces.
creativity.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's a lot of flavor based on which weapon you choose, and more importantly, as we've been harping on, the fact that the build has such distinct ways of countering it means that I've never personally experienced a time in the game where I thought to myself, oh my god, single weapon Vanessa is so oppressive, there's just nothing I can do. Like, no, you pick free skills.
That's true. There's clear counterplay, right? And
Mhm.
that's good.
And I think that's especially it, right? Like, where I don't necessarily think every build needs to have super distinct counterplay, but I do think that the more forcible a build is, the more important it is for it to have distinct counterplay, so that if you start seeing it disproportionately, you feel like you have some agency in how you want to tackle that, which I think is really good.
Yeah, what I like actually is when, and this is kind of this similar thing, is that when the strongest counter, like the strongest quote unquote hate cards exist for the most degenerate strategies. So like
Mm.
if if like freeze perma freeze you builds are like a strong thing, then I feel like okay, that's appropriate to match that with a strong anti freeze
Yeah, it
skill
was
or
like I
card.
understand why they wanted to remove rapid thought from the game, but at least at the point in time when it was originally introduced, it felt very welcome.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, like maybe that was not the end state where they wanted freeze to be, and then they felt
Yeah.
that like
I think
they
the
were
skill was
creating an
also
arms race.
bugged, right? Where like it reduced even more than the text stated that it should.
Maybe it also worked in a weird way where it had ICD, so if your opponent like
Yeah.
blizzarded you, it would
It would
like
take time for them
unfreeze
to.
them one at a time, and if you had like 10 cards on your board, your card would have unfrozen anyway by the time
Yeah,
it
yeah, I
got to
gotcha, I
that. So
gotcha.
so it was not it was not like the end state that Tempo had in mind for the
Yeah,
freeze mechanic, and
yeah.
that's clear. I mean, and maybe this isn't either, but I'm just saying like the more disruptive or game warping or like imagine like force field is really powerful.
Mhm.
Like if force field was just ruining the meta, everyone's dying in 2 seconds. Like I I would not be against a strong anti force field hate card.
Yeah. And
But
again, I'd
what
say
I don't
like
want to see hate cards
the
for is stuff like shark claws or like
yeah.
a quote unquote fair strategy. Mid range, some of the advantages of one of the advantages of playing a mid range strategy could be that you're kind of engaging with all of the strengths and weaknesses that are available in the game, and because of that, you
Yeah.
shouldn't be vulnerable to any one strength or weakness. That was part of my extreme hatred for bees.
Yeah, yeah.
Playing weapons is like fair. That's like the fairest version of the game in a way.
Yeah.
And to have the strongest hate board be anti weapons just feels so
I
like why,
also
who asked
think
for this?
like I don't like when things are overly polarized. I think it's fair to have something that makes you more favorable, but it's not as if having an icicle makes you auto beat a single weapon Vanessa board. You still need to have the rest of your board be strong enough to capitalize on the window that you bought yourself, which
Absolutely.
I think is much more like fair rather than just if your opponent only has one weapon, it can't attack. That would be like,
Yeah, that's obviously insanely like heavy-handed, right? Like
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
like you don't want to see that
Hmm.
either. I think that but honestly bees felt like that. Really was
Yes,
like if your opponent
exactly.
had a
Yeah,
weapon on their board, they lose, and
yeah.
they might lose anyway.
Uh,
So
um,
all right, we're all glad. We all hated bees.
yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
Martin, I'm sure you hated bees too. Um,
A lot of times, yeah.
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 Sadly.
But I was meaning to ask as well. You mentioned you pick up a lot of the single freeze skills on Dually. Are there any other specific matchups that you're trying to target, or is it more just they're generically good and Dually doesn't have a ton of skills that you want?
I just think those skills are very good in general. They trigger the drill also. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the main reason I take them.
I think one of my favorite interactions in the game currently is how the one-time free skills interact with Yeti Crab. The fact that if you're playing one of those like depth charge builds or even just Puffer Crab, the fact that you can start spamming a lot of just like Bjorn and the other trainers that you know have high odds of getting you free skills and see that as sort of like a both stronger and more deterministic way to pick up your poison scaling has been a incredibly fun gameplay loop for me whenever I was building those builds on Vanessa. I would love to see more cards like that interact in interesting ways with the skills we have in the game.
I actually really like the combination of freeze and poison as like a to be
Mm-hmm.
mechanically for those
It's
two to be
so
mechanically
thematic.
joined. Yeah, and I think I mean Mac has it a little bit too with like Weasel Pete and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It's not they're not really his strongest cards, so we don't really talk about them much. But I do like the mechanical. There's a good flavor and mechanical link between freeze and poison that I really like.
Yeah,
Just
I
throwing that out there.
I also kind of like the Frozen Flame a lot. It's rare that you get to play it currently, but I think it's a sweet card.
Yeah, it's a card I liked before the expansion. Let me put it. It's a card I liked before the cleanse change. I think that's another one that got hit
Mm.
really hard, but like for the same reasons that Treb got hit, I think Frozen Flame got hit.
Yeah, it's definitely the main, and I think that's good. I think it's like healthy that we have some that like burn even if you're not focusing that hard on it. It oftentimes felt like having just a little bit of burn was kind of disproportionately powerful to its investment cost. And
Yes,
that
because of the
healing,
scaling it
yeah,
provided. Yeah.
healing was just kind of a bad, especially as like an enchant. You were always like, oh, that could have been shielding, you know. But I do still feel like whenever you're applying large quantities of poison or burn, the cleanse changes have not felt like they impact me that much. But it's whenever you're trying to stack with a number that's already not that big, you very quickly notice how you're just getting nowhere. And I think
Yeah, I
that's
mean, I
like
do
a
feel like
healthy balance
Xbox was in
spot.
shambles, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that it like certain builds were really harmed by this change, and
Like if you're just having a
Matchbox comes to
single
mind.
dips events as well, not just
Yep.
trebuchet, or
Yep.
just like a soul lighter or something.
Yeah, the effectiveness of all that stuff is way down. I mean, I wonder if it will stay like this. One way to maybe make it so it's not so polarizing is to have it be like if the heal is bigger than the amount of poison or burn that you have on you, then it cleanses 10%. Otherwise, it cleanses a lower percentage. So like
I don't know. I For me
something to
personally,
moderate the strength of the heal versus the strength of the cleanse.
I
So that
think the current implementation has, at least for me personally, felt pretty good from both sides, both when I'm the one applying statuses and when I'm the one cleansing statuses. I've
yeah,
been pretty happy
I
with it.
my one complaint about it is like if your opponent has like the skill from Street Gamer or whatever,
Oh,
or so
yes.
yeah, like basically
Yeah,
there's a
that one is
couple of
broken right
cards
now.
and skills that can make it so yeah it's like impossible to
I
stack
think
burn.
maybe they will eventually at some point have a more sweeping look at changing how skills are treated in general. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain at least that I tried this in a game, but the insect bite from Mountain Pass does not activate Adrenal Converter or Rapid Injection System.
Yeah, a bunch of them are bugged. So so they're supposed to.
Oh, they are
Um,
supposed to.
I from all I mean it charges spider mace, so I don't see how
I thought it was
like
like an I figured that they'd put it in as a balance lever, and that it might be the fact that those items state when you poison yourself, whereas Spider
yeah,
Mace
but
just states
sure,
like,
but Spider Mace just says
oh, it does too, right?
when you poison, right? Like so how
That
is
is
it different?
interesting. Yeah.
So I assume it's a bug and that they actually are supposed to work with them. Um, that may
Yeah,
be
it would be
true. Or the
interesting
bug
to
is that
find out.
anything works with them, in which case, like, but that would suck. I think
Yeah.
they should be like secretly good or whatever. I think that's
I
cool.
think I kind of liked that they didn't work because it kind of lets you convert them into, oh, now we just have another way to bring back rigged, which I think maybe we should have.
Yeah, but I mean, it requires a very specific item, right? And there's other like Vanessa can quote unquote bring back rigged. Like there's other ways to do that, and also it's like way less common than rigged, right? Like your chances of getting Mountain Pass plus exactly this thing is lower than
I think it's
getting
like
rigged.
5% per time you've pressed Mountain Pass.
Yeah, so that's way less than like you click Etherite half the
I
time and
think
then she drops it 1 out of 6, right? So that would be
I think that means that it's probably comparable if you press Mountain Pass like 3 or 4 times would probably be the break point.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
It
in
might
any
be it,
case, I do
whatever.
think personally that it is probably good if we have some limitations on the way skills interact with trigger items, the same way how they remove the interaction between rust and smelling salt.
Yeah, but I think that that's something that they have been doing, right? So that's
Yeah,
why a lot of the skills now say like when you burn with an item or
yeah,
when you
yeah.
poison with an item. I think that's an attempt to tone down like skill chains and like full skill combos or whatever. And that's healthy. But then again, I think there's something to be said for leaving monster skills and like stuff like this random encounter skill that you can't get from a shop, leaving those things kind of like giving them the possibility of being broken or OP in the exact right circumstances adds excitement to the game.
I
And
think
maybe those circumstances are too easy to achieve,
mhm.
but that can
I
be
think
dialed
it's
in, is
more
my point.
like I feel like there are ways that you can do it within the bounds of the game, and then there are ways of, in quotation marks, like breaking the pre-established rules. And I think the first is a lot better than the second. If we look at something like the Draconic Rage skill, it's incredibly impactful, but at the end of the day, it's also a more specialized, souped up version of Conflagration, which is a skill that we do already have in the game. So it still interacts with many other things, like it's just as vulnerable to disruption or being outscaled or what have you. It's just a more powerful version of something you can do otherwise, compared to being a way to completely bypass the restrictions that your build is meant to have.
Yes, but you also don't want all monster skills to just be souped up versions of regular skills, right? Like that would also be like boring if
Oh, for
monsters
sure,
just drop
yeah.
like better versions. Like you want them to feel unique, and what makes them feel
Yeah, yeah.
unique is that they're a little bit quote unquote rule
Well, it's
breaking.
kind of like how I'm a big fan of Overheal Haste and the new version of Rigged because they have similar trigger conditions to other things that we have in the game, but they're powerful and unique in their own right.
Yeah, but overheal haste is a bit of a weird one because it is actually just a regular skill. So it's like you can just
Oh,
get it as
that's true.
pig.
That's true. I forget
Yeah,
that sometimes. I don't know if you can though, because it's supposedly on Vanessa as well, and I have not once seen it from Orlin.
you can
Uh,
definitely get it on pig from the store for sure. Maybe it's bugged on
okay.
Vanessa or something, but
No,
yeah, you
I
can
don't
definitely
know
get it.
because I've just not a single time seen someone have that skill drop on either of the characters, even though it states so in the game that you can. So I was unsure if it was actually possible.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay. Um, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
what about you, Martin? I've been curious. We tend to ask this to everyone who's been playing Dually, but it's not much discussion regarding if Dually is the weakest or not. I think that's reasonable to claim, but it's still interesting to hear how do you think he matches up to the other characters? Does he fall just a little bit short, or do you think he has a lot of issues currently? How would you rate Dooley right now?
I'm afraid right now that Dooley is really by far the weakest character.
What in your eyes is kind of the biggest issues that you feel Dooley has?
Yeah, it has no late game. As I said before, like Dualtron is the only viable option really, and I very rarely find him sadly. Yeah, and Pig and Mac right now feel like super busted. So Dooley compared to those two really falls very short. I think Vanessa is in a very, very balanced, good state right now. But Muck and Pig are, yeah, much
Yeah,
stronger
I
than
can
Dooley.
see that. Like something that I've always noticed crops up a lot when I played a lot of Vanessa, I still felt like she was like the arguably second weakest character at the time, and I've played her sometimes where most people would agree that she's straight up the weakest, and it always feels like she's never been that terrible to try to play more than anything because powder keg has always existed, and it just means that there's never a scenario where you tend to face a pig board in the late game that there's just no way that you can even assemble a theoretical board that can beat it. Most boards, Vanessa has the tools to mean that at least, like, even if you have to try to pivot to specific late game outs to have a chance, it at least means that there is a theoretical scenario where you do have a chance. Whereas on Dooley, it's always felt a little bit like the only really, really scary comp he gets is Force Field, and a lot of the time you need to hit both specific criteria to enable the force field, and then you do need to hit the force field, and then you do need to hit specific items where there's no way to like reliably get into it the same way that I feel like you've been able to historically with Keg. Would you agree with that, Martin?
Absolutely true, yeah. But
Yeah,
even
I mean the
force
only
field,
real
it's so hard to set up. So for me, it's rather a niche build that
Mm,
happens like from time to time, very rarely.
Yeah, the way to get force field more is to do the skill start and then you have the whole game to find it when you get defense
yeah.
like
True, true, yeah.
that's the way to have more force field games as a percentage of your games. Whether or not that's actually the better way to play is debatable, but that is the way to you get it more often. Um,
Yeah. I
I will
do.
I
Yeah,
will
go
say
on, go
that
on.
I think one thing that Dooley is supposed to have that they're trying to introduce for a late game is he's supposed to have like atomic clock slash maybe um what is the card called, antimatter chamber or
Oh yeah, I've
something,
been
like something
hearing
with
that
like
people have been having success with that, but I haven't
I'm
seen
not
it
sure if they're
myself.
good or not, but my point is that
Yeah.
like maybe the direction that Dooley should be looking to for thinking about playing in the twilight days, like the the 13, 14, 15,
Hmm.
um is more something along the lines of Mamasaur, although she's pretty bad in my mind, or like atomic clock, antimatter chamber. You can't use your items. Like that. Dooley's late game boards are actually supposed to be like lock boards, like all lock pieces, and not really kill you at all. Um, that is
Yeah.
maybe like the game vision that Tempo has. It doesn't really seem like that's something that you can assemble with any regularity, and
True,
that's difficult.
absolutely true, yeah.
But that maybe is like the direction they're going for. And I think it's a super cool direction. If it ever
Yeah.
does become a good board, people are going to hate Dooley so much. They're going to hate Dooley more than they already did. Like, there's nothing more infuriating than losing to Atomic Clock. That's way more annoying than Monitor
Yeah.
Blizzard, I promise
Yeah,
you.
I had a
So,
loss to Atomic Clock this week, and I was mad about it. Wolf knows.
so like maybe I'm just trying to theorize like what the late game direction of Dooley is supposed to be really
Yeah, I
outside
think it
of.
would be like destroy as a mechanic is something that has to be heavily regulated because it is one of those frustrating, polarizing, like at least if you get one shot by a keg, it's just it goes off and then you were dead and you don't have to stare blankly at your empty board while you get whittled away for a million years by something.
Yeah.
Which I always think that's like the big reason why there's such a, at least I think it feels so much worse to get locked out by destroy or freeze. It's the portion where I have to stare for 20 seconds as I die slowly and really just soak in the vitriol of what I'm experiencing. But at the same time, I do think it is interesting how Destroy as a mechanic is something that has a lot of unique interactions and tuning levers in terms of how it will affect other boards. Especially if you go for items that destroy a lot of small items at the same time, or single target disruption, but that isn't size capped, or
Yeah, I mean you
how.
can also include virus, right? Like that's kind of
Right, yeah.
a soft form of item destruction or a different form of it.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where those type of lockout mechanics, and especially so, the issue with freeze, right, is that it's so binary a lot of the time. Where if you're going for freeze as your primary win condition, you really have to freeze like everything, or it's probably not gonna be good enough. Like there's a very strict line between either you permafreeze or you don't. Whereas partial destruction of the enemy board can still completely crumble synergistic boards. If you're up against Poppy Field and you destroyed their Poppy Field, then they are a lot weaker than they would be if they still had the Poppy Field. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it still has many of the same interactions where even if you destroy their board, if they could apply 1,000 poison to you before you did so, you might still lose, which I think makes it. It feels like something that is more interesting than freeze to me, at least.
Yeah, I think freeze as a means to scale your down. Like, so for example, you mentioned Yeti Crab earlier, like the Yeti Crab depth charge. That
Yeah.
version of quote unquote freeze, like a bunch of half-second freezes. I don't mind that at all. I
Yeah.
think that's
It
totally healthy.
only to clarify, I think destroy is a more interesting mechanic than permafreeze or near permafreeze
Yeah,
strategies.
yeah, yeah. Freeze as a lock is insanely annoying.
Yeah.
Freeze as a one-time thing, or as like these, or like the way it's implemented on depth charge, I think is really good.
Yeah.
Actually, is like really good, really uh promoting
It's
of
great that
diversity
they
of boards.
also chose to go down to 0.5 interval as a valid selector for both Blue Beetle and then
I agree.
depth charge gives them a lot more flexibility.
All right, you want to do board of the week? I think that was a pretty good meta
Yeah, we can
discussion.
just see. Martin, do you have any closing thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, we can jump to the board of the week. Why
Yeah,
not?
okay,
Lua?
sounds good. I'll bring it up. It was you who provided it. This is a slightly blurry, but we've got a Eye of the Colossus, Shiny Drill, Metronome, Redbug, Clamra, Restorative Ignition Core board with Knife Trick as well. Why don't you tell us a bit about this one? It looks pretty spicy. Oh, you got anything to win as well. That's the nut.
Excuse
Yeah,
me, I
the
thought
funny
Dooley had no endgame.
the funny part actually is that a Twitch viewer advised me to try it out. I was a bit afraid to play
Right.
the Eye of the Colossus, but I tried it and yeah, it went well.
It's
No, I love this card. I've played this card on drill boards before. This one of
mm,
my favorite for sure. This card is so fun to play with.
it's so topical too. This is the prophesized destroy dually
Yeah,
endgame
the
board.
the dually endgame item destruction. It's here. Like, but yeah, I mean, it's a cool look. It's a cool way to cap out. It is. It like
I do think so.
this is day what 13. Like
Yeah.
that's appropriate for day 13. I'm not mad if my opponent kills all my stuff with Eye of the Colossus. Fair play. Like that's cool.
Yeah. What kind
Yeah,
of
I remember that game well, and I had a lot of fun. I think
what
this was
led you
my
sort of
funniest game.
into this board? Did you have the Eye of Colossus in your bag for a long while, or were you already on this board and then you just slammed it in there?
If I remember correctly, I think I got it one day before,
Hmm.
and again, some Twitch viewer advised me to please try it out, that it will work. I was a bit skeptical, but yeah, was one of the most fun builds I played
There you
in the
go.
last few
I mean,
weeks.
it's a pretty sick board. Let's be
And you got
honest.
knife tricks too, because why not? Knife trick,
Yeah.
shiny drill. That's yeah, seems good
I always
Um.
love when you can include those legendary items
Yeah.
somehow.
for sure.
I
They.
For
feel
sure.
these days it's a bit less than it was like a
Mm-hmm.
few months back, where you could play them more frequently.
Yeah, you used to just be able to put when it was significantly slower meta, you used to kind of just be able to put Soul of the District on your board and
True,
play it
true.
Yeah.
all the time if you got it. Like, but it's a little slow for that
Yeah, the meta
now,
is very
unfortunately.
fast-paced right now. I
Yeah.
agree, yeah.
There we
All
go.
right.
That felt like a great one to wrap it up on. We'll do some socials as well. Martin, where can people find more of you?
All right, yeah, for now I'm only really streaming on Twitch. I don't have any additional social media accounts. So for now it's only Twitch TV/MartinPill.
There you go. And Walter, what about you?
You can hit me up on Discord. You can find me in your favorite or least favorite streamers chat. Um, feel free to say hello. Feel free to say hello in the comments. Um, yeah. Metal, how about you? Where can they
Yeah,
find you?
I stream somewhat sporadically at twitch.tv/MetallFenix with two L's and an F. Same name is on the screen. And I also have a YouTube channel where I upload guides primarily. I did a really extensive 40-minute video covering pretty much everything about the latest Mac expansion. And I also have two shorter videos from when the character came out, covering a lot of the early game and stuff like that. So if there's anyone listening who's looking to pick up Mac, or especially if you're looking to start playing with the new items, I'd highly recommend checking those out. I think it's a great starting point. I also
Yeah,
do
and let
have
me
a yeah.
second that recommendation that it's a really good, like it's a really good resource to learn how to use the new cards well, and they're really strong. So if you like winning games of the Bazaar, it's a really good video to watch. So
Yeah,
highly
I think
recommended.
that's like one of the biggest things, right? Is that it can be so intimidating to figure out where to start on something in the bazaar. It's just a lot of
Yeah,
information
it's like
overload.
there's 10 new cards. If
Yeah.
you're not sure how to get into a board with them, it's absolutely intimidating. Like
And
even
for
if you've
me,
played Mac before, like still.
yeah. For me, at least, a lot of the time I've been learning from watching other streamers and content creators. But the tricky part can be, right, like if you don't happen to watch a streamer that ever plays Mac, for example, then it's hard if you also need to go find someone and then figure out if they're good on Mac and then see if they feel like explaining what they're doing. And it's nice to just have a jumping off point, just some kind of overview to make the first step less intimidating, I think, at least. So that's what I've been going for. I hope people feel the same way about the guides. And I also have a Discord where if you want to ask me personally any questions, then feel free to jump in there or just share whatever builds you've been up to. Come chat, hang out. It'll be a good time.
It's
All
actually
right.
really sad that Sixten isn't here because I was watching him back then a lot.
Mm,
He was my dually inspiration, kinda.
yeah, he
I'm
just
sad that he isn't streaming anymore, it seems like.
hopefully we'll see more of him soon. He just ended up tangled up in some other stuff today. Unfortunately, couldn't make it for the recording session, but hopefully he'll be back as usual for the next week's episode, which is a great
And
yeah.
pig players, yeah, don't worry, we didn't forget about you. We
Yes,
have a pig-centric guest next week. We promise.
it's true. We made sure we hooked you up. Walter dug deep into his connections. We're gonna have a great guest
Yeah, my
who'll talk a lot
connections.
about Pygmalion. Yeah, so it's definitely what happened.
My
You're
extensive network.
yeah, you have
Yeah.
an extensive network of
Yep.
industry ins, and that's the only way we could reel in
That's
such an
correct.
elusive guest. You definitely didn't just ask a good player if they wanted to come on the show. It's
No,
way
it's way
more,
harder. It's way more difficult than that. Trust
yeah,
me.
it's way more complicated and
Yeah.
devious and filled with intrigue and all of that. So
Mhm.
that's what goes on behind the scenes. It's practically like a, oh,
It's like
yeah,
a
now you
spy
wouldn't
movie
believe
a
it.
little
Yeah, it's
bit.
like a spy movie. Anyways, with all that said, as I mentioned, you can find us on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, via RSS feed. We record these episodes weekly. Every week we have a new guest. Next week will be the same. Will be a new guest. We'll talk about Pygmalion. I think we're expecting a balance patch on Wednesday as well, so there'll most likely be a lot of new stuff to cover just in general. So look forward to that. And in the meantime, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you next time.